All right, welcome everyone. We hope that you're all safe and sound these days. This is a live webinar and it's entitled Where Data Security and Data Privacy Meet Together. And we are going to explore the concepts of data security and of data privacy, and we'll also check out where they intersect and what that means for your data security strategy. My name is Felix Rosbach. I'm the head of product marketing here at Comforte, and with me today is Heidi Shea, the principal analyst for security and risk at Forrester, and she will introduce herself in a few seconds. Before we start, a bit of housekeeping. We do have attendees from all over the world today, which is great, and it's great to see you all here. And feel free to write down questions because we will open the chat as soon as the presentations are finished, and we will have a short Q&A session then. So I hope you all have a coffee or tea available now, and I hope that you will get some great insights out of this. And without further ado, we should start this. Heidi, the stage is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Felix. And hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks to Comfort for inviting me to participate. So where data security and privacy meet together. Now, oftentimes you might hear that security, privacy, they're two sides of the same coin. Or you may hear that they intertwine, they intersect, but I'd like to offer another way of thinking about this relationship, where privacy is like coffee. In order for it to exist, you have to have the coffee beans. So these coffee beans, these are your security controls. You also need water. These are your processes, your procedures, your policies. So there's no compromising when it comes to bringing these components together. You really need both and all of this in order to make your coffee, in order to have privacy. Because security here, your coffee beans, this is a supporting control for privacy. That's why we are able to have security without privacy, but it cannot be the other way around. You can't have privacy without security. And this is not the only relationship to consider as well. There's also privacy and ethics. These things go together. And so you can think of coffee ice cream as ethics. It requires good coffee or good privacy. Otherwise, you have plain vanilla, which may or may not be good vanilla ice cream. So here we have coffee ice cream, but we also have breaches. But not all breaches are created equal. The nature of a breach will determine the consequences. If your coffee beans, if this is security, and you spill your coffee beans, that's a breach of security with how you protect data. And it's messy, but you can clean it up okay and continue to move on. However, if ice cream is ethics and you drop your ice cream on the floor, that's a breach of ethics, or in other words, it's a breach of trust with how you're using and how you're processing data. This can be a very sticky situation and much harder to clean up. So coffee ice cream, this is one way of thinking about this relationship between privacy and security, but I'll offer another view as well for NIST. So NIST has a privacy framework that they've produced, and this is another way of thinking of this overlap, the intersection between privacy and security risk. It's addressing these risks through this intersection of proper controls for the data and the proper use and processing of that data. With privacy today, regulatory compliance, it drives a lot of how companies think about their approach. Four-letter acronyms like GDPR, for example. But privacy regulation is more than just GDPR, especially for companies that are operating across countries, across regions. So what you're seeing here is Forrester's global map of privacy rights and regulations. In 2019, we looked at 61 different countries, and there was a lot to consider. So beyond GDPR, we'll be looking at things like Brazil. They've got their LGPD. India, Japan, these are also countries to watch. There's this broader trend of moving towards more GDPR-like requirements as countries are updating or revising their privacy regulations. In the US, for example, there's a great amount of attention these days on California with California's CCPA regulation. And GDPR, CCPA, they have some things in common. They have both expanded this view of personal data, of what is personal data. There are stronger protections for individuals now and privacy rights. There's more protection for children's data. And overall, with the splash that these have with businesses today, and even consumers, it's really helped to raise greater awareness of privacy risk, as well as privacy rights for individuals. And these things are here to stay. But privacy regulations, they're not exactly easy to address. It comes with challenges, and these are some of the common ones that I've seen. So your privacy regulations, they don't necessarily spell out the specifics for controls. You might see language like quote unquote reasonable security. Companies, they find it really challenging to identify, well, what does this mean? What kind of control should we be putting in place? And so it's also common to see organizations start to over-rely on technology as the answer to, or their approach to meeting compliance. They may think that encrypting data is the primary control, but there are other options when it comes to technology. It's also critical here to develop strong processes for security and privacy, whether these are processes that can help to enable the fulfillment of data subject access requests in a consistent, in a secure manner, or whether it's processes to understand data risk and enable privacy by design. And technology does have a role. The need to comply with privacy regulations has really put a focus on different types of supporting tools. There's been an uptick in interest and demand in things like data discovery tools that can help you identify personal information, where it is, what's your sensitive data. Now, these tools, they're not perfect, but it's much better than having nothing at all here, because I've found that talking to a lot of our clients, companies, they often don't know where their data is and how much they have. And trying to use manual processes to discover and classify data, it's not sustainable. You can't really keep up doing that anymore. There's also been great interest in technologies like anonymization de-identification tools. The challenge here is that it's not this on-off switch, but more like a spectrum where you have to balance de-identifying the data versus the utility that you get out of it. And these standards, the regulatory guidance for de-identification, these are things that will likely continue to evolve as well. And this last piece, misplaced confidence. While compliance matters, we can't equate it to security. Compliance is the floor. It's not a ceiling. So it's important to focus on measures for data-centric security and not take this compliance checkbox approach when it comes to security. And what does this mean? A data-centric approach. Data-centric here means bringing your controls closer to the data itself, having your controls that touch your data for data protection. So this is different from controls that would protect your infrastructure, like your networks or your cloud workloads, for example. And a data-centric approach is required because, well, data is your new perimeter. So if you imagine this blue dot in the middle of this globe here as your data, it needs to be accessed today by different user populations, whether it's your own employees or maybe contractors and other people who need to use this data. And these individuals, they are accessing this data through different types of channels today, different devices, whether it's corporate issued devices that the company itself can control and maintain. They may be accessing this data through personal devices and others as well. And this data it's hosted in different places. It might be on-premise in different applications. It may be in all sorts of different types of clouds as well. So your controls need to travel with this data regardless of where it is. And I think that's even heightened a bit more today now that we have more people who are working from home due to this pandemic. And so how do we think about how we approach this? Forrester's data security control framework is one way that we use to help put out a high level view of what this could look like. And it's defined in three different key phases. The first being define, which is discovery, classification, helping to identify just where is your data? What do you have? What's sensitive? So having that, building that foundation for understanding what it is that you need to protect. The next phase is about dissecting your data. This involves both data intelligence and data threats. So what data intelligence means here is understanding how does your data flow? Why does the business even have this data? How was it collected? How was it created? Where was it sourced from? And how is this data used? So this intelligence is also business and contextual insight about your data as well. So this is all information that can help you to better understand your data's life cycle, as well as its criticality to the business and how you may want to think about policies and controls around it. On the other side of dissecting your data is data threats. Understanding, well, what are the threats to your data? What's likely, what's possible, where are your vulnerabilities? So you really need both sides of this view of understanding your data and the environment that it is in. And then finally, this last piece here is about defending your data. Four key pillars for defense: access control, controlling who has access to this data; inspect, this is about inspecting your data usage patterns to look for anomalies and things that may be considered suspicious behavior or just strange behavior when it comes to data use; dispose, defensible disposal of your data, getting rid of data that the business no longer needs for legitimate business purposes, but also identifying what you do need to keep and retain so you can archive it and protect it appropriately. And then obfuscate. So more in that, but these are different techniques and there's different ways to go about it. The point with obfuscation is to make it unusable or to devalue it for attackers and those who should not be able to use it. So you can achieve this through different means. Encryption is typically a cornerstone for obfuscation, but it's not the only way. There are different techniques like data masking, tokenization, de-identification, redaction, for example. These are all different ways to obfuscate your data and support security and privacy. Now, compliance, it matters a lot. So we've talked about a framework as a way to approach it. And compliance, it really should not be the basis for an approach or your security and privacy program, because there's many different compliance requirements out there, and if you base it all on meeting a specific one, it's very limiting. These things, compliance, these are moving targets. New laws can come into play, guidance can change and evolve. You can also be compliant and still fail in the eyes of your customers. A good example here is with breach notification. It is required in many cases, and many companies, they simply treat it as this legal obligation as a part of their breach response, rather than looking at it as an opportunity to rebuild customer trust. So just that viewpoint and that approach and how we think about these things, it impacts the outcomes and how we go about meeting these requirements. We have to remember that regulations, these things are reactive. Companies have failed to do the right thing, the proper thing, and that's why the regulators are stepping in. With GDPR, we've seen some interesting trends when it comes to enforcement. Breaches, they're typically the starting point. This is what's getting the regulators' attention. It's also about impact and not necessarily volume, where we see fines for. So there was one case of a hospital in Germany where this was one patient's record It was mishandled. The result was a fine of 105,000 euros for one patient. Data governance failures are the things that seem to trigger the most fines and penalties so far. This is about how you're using the data, how you're processing it. Do you have sufficient basis for lawful processing of data? What it means here is that issues of data accuracy, quality, fairness of data use, these are all things that matter a lot. We need to focus on how we might minimize data collection in the first place, and also really clearly define the purpose that we have for using this data. And so the next wave of penalties we think are likely going to arise from a failure to meet individuals' rights. Things like the ability to fulfill data subject access requests, for example, to do it completely, securely, and in a timely manner. So compliance, it still matters. And if you establish robust security controls and have strong privacy practices, you set yourself up for repeatable successes so that you have this strong foundation in place to enable you to respond, to adapt to existing as well as new compliance requirements. So if we go back to the example of coffee, think about what you need in order to consistently produce good coffee. So consistently have good privacy, as well as coffee ice cream. So an ethical use of data for your organization. And there'll be some core components that are involved. You'll need to bring together these core components. So in the case of coffee, think about how this could be maybe a source of heat for brewing the coffee, a way to grind your beans, apparatus for making the coffee, a spoon for stirring if you take your coffee with sugar and cream, and napkins to clean up any spills. No matter what type of coffee you're making, these are all the proper tools, I guess, or the components that you'll need to do this time and time again. If we translate this for privacy, we can start to break it down into 5 core steps to help enable sustained compliance. First one being maintaining consistent data security no matter where your data resides. So no matter where your data is, you'll want capabilities to protect it, whether it's on-premise, in the cloud, or with third party. It really starts with understanding where it is, where that data is, and what that data is. And often companies will also turn to things like privacy management software to help support their privacy program at a global scale. It takes them out of having spreadsheets for tracking everything, if you can have these types of tools to support the program like that. This also involves investing in data discovery and classification tools to get started. And this really needs to be a priority, data discovery and classification, because it not only supports compliance, but it also brings together other benefits. It gives you better data visibility. It can help to support data hygiene efforts and support the efforts you have to improve data access controls as well. Third step here is to focus on securing what the business needs. So this is about having clear alignment between business and security to protect what matters. And we hear about this point about enabling the business, enabling its initiatives. And people repeat these things for a reason because it's critical to do. Now, Forrester, we've seen that firms that fully comply with GDPR, they are much more likely to have security policies and tools that are in place for things like securing the use of, let's say, Internet of Things, for example, within their company, if that is a major initiative. These companies are also more successful compared to less mature firms when it comes to things like protecting their cloud environments, especially if they identify that this is a core piece of their infrastructure and something that they rely on a lot to keep the business running. Automate fulfillment of individuals' privacy rights. So this is about, you really need to be able to address your customers' requests for deletion, for access to their data, the portability of their data, and to do so at scale and in a repeatable, consistent way so that you can keep up with and continue to fulfill these requests within an appropriate timeline. This would require investment in tools that can take in these customer requests, perform identity verification, and execute on the workflows to deliver the request. So this is an opportunity as well when it comes to customer experience. It's not just a compliance obligation. And then last but not least, establish this strong working relationship across functions of the business, especially between IT and data science teams. That is one that we're seeing as especially important today. Being able to work together here leads to a better understanding of business context for your various data assets, of why you have this data, what it's used for, how people want and need to work with this data. And this is going to help to improve the decisions that you make of what is considered appropriate security controls, decisions for data access and governance, as well as any necessary policies and related enforcement actions that need to take place. So consider this your foundation for all your other efforts that come around here for security and for privacy. And with that, I hope that's helpful for folks to try to think about this in a slightly different way and how we might approach it. And I will turn things back over to Felix here.
Yeah, thank you, Heidi. I will start my screen sharing. Here we go. I think that was a great presentation. Actually, it's really good to have that that different view on data privacy and data security. And the second part of this webinar is intended to give you an overview about the data-centric, or let's call it data-focused security solutions that are available in the market. And before we start, actually, just a few words about cybersecurity. One of the last events we actually attended this year, before all events were stopped, basically was RSA. And looking at the huge amount of vendors you find there, they actually set it up booths in the hallways. We clearly see that the cybersecurity space is fairly crowded, and it's really hard to find the right solution for your specific business problem. And while I'm in the cybersecurity space for about 10 years now, I'm far away from being a veteran as you guys might be. But coming from a technical background, I always state that there is no silver bullet for cybersecurity. Every vendor who claims that is basically wrong, and we all know that. And we all know that it's basically a mix of solution that is needed to implement strong cybersecurity. And especially with the current situation we are in, it becomes more and more important to prioritize, to look for solutions that tackle fundamental problems, that solve challenges on a higher level, and that integrate into your existing environment, and not just create another silo. So this is really important when we look at solutions, or at cybersecurity solutions, from a higher perspective. And another important thing that we want to state here is seeing cybersecurity as an enabler is absolutely crucial. Some enterprises see cybersecurity just as a kind of insurance, and it's really hard to get the budget for such an initiative. So seeing cybersecurity as an enabler is very important. And the good news is, and that basically goes in line with what we talk about today, the intersection of data privacy regulations and data security brings a great opportunity in that space. And the question is, why is that? Why can we say that? One of the main reasons is that we talk about securing data. And we all hear those statements like data is the new oil, or data is the new gold. And while I think that those statements are questionable, it shows how modern enterprises actually think about data. Because the ability to use the data, or to monetize the data, to learn from your data, allows enterprises to make informed decisions, to automate processes, to basically increase the revenue, and that makes it beautiful as a topic. Statistics say that by 2021, insight-driven businesses are predicted to take 1.8 trillion annually from their less informed peers. Or if we say it in less statistical words, actually data-driven organizations are more likely to acquire customers. But there are also challenges, and Heidi explained that very well. We have data privacy. And looking at it from a personal perspective, I think we all agree that we want our data to be secure. We don't want to see fraud or identity theft on a personal level. But with regulations like GDPR and HIPAA and CCPA, privacy and data security have become important on board level in enterprises. And the key here is that we need to understand how to, on the one hand side, leverage the power of the data, while on the other side maintaining the regulatory compliance and of course the corporate responsibility, or in other words, trust. So if we summarize that, we know that the data is valuable. We know that there's a need for data privacy. We all agree on that, and we need solutions for that. And in a very crowded cybersecurity market or space, it's really hard to identify or to find solutions that help you to implement data privacy in a sustainable way. So the question is, what next? What can you do now? And if you look at it from a historic perspective, not too long ago, things were nice and simple. Because organizations were able to build a perimeter defense around their systems. They were able to protect their data. And with that, they created some kind of protected space where they were able to do anything they wanted to do with that data. Absolutely beautiful. But over the time, with more digital channels, data sources started to shift outside of the perimeter. And organizations they started to punch small holes in the perimeter, and they started to connect to these new digital channels. And then organizations have started to shift huge amounts of data outside of the perimeter into the cloud. According to Forbes, 83% of enterprise workloads already moved to the cloud. And the cloud also changed the way we are able to develop applications. Cloud native applications are part of the strategy of enterprises worldwide, and they use the cloud in various different ways. We see so many use cases, so many different things you can do with the cloud today. So it's a really powerful tool. But again, perimeter defense becomes a problem in the cloud. And then we have the IoT. IoT use cases are leading basically to even more data getting created outside the perimeter. And all that happens on insecure devices. And that could be a problem. And then we have the data exchange with business partners that puts the data outside of the control of your perimeter. So if we add all this up, it becomes clear that there is basically no perimeter anymore. We are looking at a complex architecture that crosses organizational boundaries. This is fairly hard to secure and fairly hard to implement breach prevention or breach protection. So let's look what happens when sensitive data gets created in such an architecture. So for example, here the data gets created in a web application or by an IoT device. What happens then is that this sensitive data starts to move through the organization's network, and it gets processed and analyzed. And we know that for every data set, you have about 10 copies in your network. And as Heidi stated in the first part of this webinar, most companies really don't know where that data is and what happens with the data. So it could be fairly complex and fairly hard to actually get an overview about the usage of sensitive data in your network. And then again, the sensitive data continues to spread further. It goes to the cloud, you use it in the cloud, you store it basically in the cloud, for example, and then it gets shared with business partners. And at this point, the sensitive data is spread across the whole architecture, and it's a really serious risk. So if we summarize that, we have a complex network. We have a lot of vulnerabilities because we have a lot of different machines, a lot of different operating systems. And we, of course, have bad actors who also know that the data is valuable. They want to sell it, and they want to basically get access to that data. And often the threat is also internal, because you have third parties accessing the data, or even by mistake, or employees can do something wrong. And if we look at the current situation with all those home office initiatives that we see, there's an absolutely incredible increase of the attack surface that we can see. So we can't expect that with this increasing complexity of our infrastructure, that we are still able to use the same perimeter defense approach that we used years ago. And now again, organizations are not only facing those security risks, they also need to comply to industry regulations and data privacy laws, and they require them to protect sensitive data, or they face basically serious fines, and we see that with GDPR. So the question is there a better way to protect the data, the sensitive data? And what we see here are the two basic rules of data-centric security. To make it simple, we want to protect data at the earliest possible point, and we want to deprotect only when absolutely necessary. And while this sounds fairly simple, to accommodate that, you need to do more than just turning on the data protection switch. This image shows what is actually needed to implement data-centric security. And of course, you have to start with balancing risk and business needs. You have those regulations on the one hand side, on the other side, you want to monetize the data. And when you do that, you are able to identify and prioritize and manage the data set life cycles. And with that, you can define data security policies, which then lead to better implemented security products, which allows you to orchestrate those policies across your network, across your enterprise. But in fact, if we look at the market, if we look at the actual situation that a lot of enterprises have, it's really hard to actually balance the risks and the business needs, because it's hard to identify and prioritize risks when the knowledge is missing, when you don't know what kind of data you have, which then leads to problems when you want to identify, when you want to prioritize the data life cycles, because you have missing information, missing visibility to the data, and basically no overview. And then that leads to poorly defined data security policies, because those policies, if you don't know anything, or if you don't know enough about your data, those policies probably don't fit to the real world business processes you have in your enterprise. And then that leads to poorly implemented security products. The missing knowledge leads to it's basically impossible to implement the right security countermeasures if you don't know how to protect the data and which security policies apply. And all that leads to a missing orchestration of the policies. And that's a very difficult, a very problematic situation, because with that, it's fairly impossible to achieve regulatory compliance, and you have a high risk in your enterprise. So from a solution perspective, what is needed to help enterprises, to help companies to solve that problem? And let's look at the four main pillars of data-centric security. And Heidi was already talking about the main things you need, the main ingredients to brew your coffee, basically. And we will dive a little bit deeper here. Let's start with discovery. Discovery is really important. You basically need discovery to do everything else. You can't protect data without knowing where it is, how it is stored, how it is processed, how it is shared. And regulations like GDPR, like CCPA, like LGPD in Brazil, they actually place an obligation on the controller, on the enterprise, to know where all the data sources and the personal data is to be found, and what is happening with that data. So an automatic, a continuous discovery, an ongoing discovery of personal or of sensitive data is absolutely mandatory. Then we have the second pillar, which is classification. Because if you now know where the data is, the next step is you need to find out more about those data sets. How is sensitive data being used? What type of data is it? What policies do apply? And how does sensitive data flow? So you want to learn more about the data. And then the next logical step, if you know where your data is, you gain more intelligence about it, you know which policies apply, then the next step is basically you want to apply data protection. And ideally, this protection does not affect the usability of the data, because you want to make sure that it's protected all the time, that the protection travels with the data wherever it goes. And those three pillars make a lot of sense, but without the fourth thing here, you basically aren't able to implement data security in your network, because you want to make sure that all of this not only integrates with your existing security infrastructure, like identity and access management, like your SIEM system, SecOps. It also needs to be integrated into your applications, because you want to make sure that based on the user rights, you can decide who is actually allowed to get access to the sensitive information. And all this needs to happen without disrupting your business. For your cloud and as a service applications, for example, you want to transparently protect the data. You want an integration that snaps right in, that users don't even mention. And also for legacy applications, a lot of companies have those in place. The data protection needs to happen with the minimum development effort to allow the protection without actually changing the application. So this is a crucial part of it. And yeah, all those pillars are important, and all those pillars are on its own very, very important to implement security. Actually, when there's an integration between these systems, this eases the implementation of data-centric security a lot. And that is basically what Comforte can offer with our data security platform. One great example, one great use case is the ability to check your data security project status. If you want to see the project success of protecting PII data, for example, in your network, the ongoing discovery allows you to identify unprotected elements and then include those into your protection strategy going forward. And this becomes absolutely crucial for many enterprises, because the landscape changes rapidly. Yeah, you have a lot more projects going on, and you have a lot of new applications that might be implemented over the year, and then actually the security landscape or the data protection landscape changes too, and you want to make sure that you keep pace with that. So that's about the overall idea of data-centric security and how you can apply that in your network. But let's take a look at how data protection could actually look like. Let's check out what type of data protection methods make sense for protecting sensitive information, like customer data, for example. And let's take a look at four different protection methods and that are common in modern enterprises, and see what they do actually with the data. The first example we look at is volume level encryption or disk encryption, basically. So what happens with the data if we apply volume level encryption here? Basically nothing, at least on a digital level. Volume level encryption only helps you if somebody wants to steal your data, stealing your hard disk, basically doing breaching your data center Mission Impossible style and running away with your hard disk. Then volume level encryption helps you, but as soon as you unlock the hard drive to work with the data on a digital level, it's in the clear. So volume level encryption might not be the right solution or the right approach if you want to actually implement data-centric security in your network. Another option is data masking. What happens to the data if we apply data masking to it? As we can see here, the data is protected. Actually, data masking allows you to process the sensitive data in its protected form, which is great. But if you want to protect if you want to use the data for any kind of ongoing processing, data masking might not be the right choice, because data masking is irreversible, and it significantly limits the utility of the data. So if you want to protect data on the presentation layer, for example, data masking makes a lot of sense. If a user or client is not allowed to see the data set in the clear, data masking is good. Dynamic data masking is a very useful, very powerful tool here. But for really implementing data-centric security, protecting data as early as possible, and then running your workload on protected data, data masking might not be the right choice. Let's look at the third option, third protection method here, classic encryption. This is really good protection method, especially when it comes to binary large objects or unstructured data. One problem is through that every time that you want to use the data, you actually want to access the data, you have to decrypt it. Yeah? Because as we can see here, what happens with the data, basically it's protected, but you can't actually do anything with it in its protected form. And this results in places in the network where the data is in the clear, and attackers are able to get access to that sensitive information. And in addition, the complexity of key management also introduces new challenges when you try to protect data from unauthorized access. Because sharing secrets is always a risk, and we see that in recent examples in the media where companies actually lost encrypted data and they weren't sure if the encryption keys were stolen with the data. And then the whole thing doesn't make sense, because if you can't make sure that an attacker gets access to the encryption keys, the data is basically not protected. So let's look at the last option that we wanted to look at, tokenization or format preserving encryption. What happens to the data if we apply a format preserving protection method? Basically, this technology replaces sensitive elements with tokens that will then represent the original element. And the tokens that are generated are format preserving. Also, you're able to keep parts of the data in the clear. And this allows you to run workload on the tokens. And all this results in a strong protection that can travel with your data while it keeps the characteristics of the original data element. And so the data can still be used for applications, for processing. You can run data analytics on it, and all that without the need to actually deprotect the data. So that means if a data set that is under a regulation that is that should be protected, contains a mix of sensitive data elements, such as PII, for example, and on the other side, data that is not sensitive or that is not regulated, you're actually able to protect the data on the individual data element level, and then keep parts of it in the clear. And that all boils down to a data set that has basically the same size, but is now full of tokens instead of sensitive data elements. And the good thing about format preserving technology, like tokenization or format preserving encryption, is that it can work alongside your existing infrastructure, even independent, if you will, because you can use it along your existing perimeter network and storage security solutions that you have already in place. But it adds a significant value because the data is always protected, wherever it goes, or whomever is actually seeing or using it. Yeah. So if you apply that now to our sample architecture that we were looking at, what happens if we apply those two principles? First, we want to protect the data as early as possible. Then turn the sensitive data into something that is protected, that is a token. And what happens now is the protected data, instead of the sensitive data in the clear, spreads through the architecture, spreads through the network. And then in the end, we only run on protected data, and allows us to make sure that the protection or the security travels wherever the data travels. But coming back to our topic, data privacy and data security, what does it mean for compliance and data privacy if we use that approach? The thing is, and Heidi already said that you might need to comply to a very specific regulation, or you need to comply to various different regulations if you operate globally. And while those regulations may differ in some aspects, the most regulations have some core requirements in common. For example, the protection of sensitive data or the timely notifications in the event of a breach. And what you want to do is you want to minimize the redundant work, and want to make sure that you find out where those regulations overlap and what kind of security countermeasures you can use to comply to many regulations to achieve cross-regulatory compliance, basically. And let's look at two examples here. One very important example is limiting the access to sensitive data. And this is basically a key component of most of the common regulations. And there are two advantages of this. The first advantage is every account that has access to sensitive data is actually a possible attack vector. And with that, limiting the access to that data is also limiting vulnerability. Even if users are properly trained, and we see that a lot, handling sensitive data, actually they can share their credentials. Something can happen. They can be their account can be compromised, and so malicious actors get access to the sensitive information. So it's really important to limit the access. Yeah. And the second benefit of it is it narrows down the list of possible sources when it comes to a breach, and you have to do an investigation. With that, limiting the access can be seen as both a proactive and a retroactive security measure. And with tokenization, or with format preserving protection, employees are able to work with tokens or protected data, and therefore they are not using any type of sensitive information for a lot of use cases. And so the access to the actual sensitive information can be limited to an absolute minimum. And this basically results in a reduced scope for regulations like PCI DSS, for example, and also in a reduced scope for internal audits. And another example is in the event of a breach, organizations will not necessarily be penalized, but they have to demonstrate, and we see that with GDPR and the recent examples, they have to demonstrate that the security was up to par with what is required, and that they responded in the right way. Yeah. And GDPR is a basis for many regulations worldwide. And GDPR states that if the sensitive data that is involved in a breach was protected with the appropriate measures, for example, tokenization or encryption, it's actually not necessary to report the breach. There's no obligation to disclose the breach. And this is an absolute a great thing for enterprises. So if you protect the data in the right way, if you apply data-centric security, you can make sure that hackers or attackers don't get access to sensitive information. They only get access to the protected data. And then if a breach happens, you don't have the obligation to disclose it, which is absolutely great. So these are two examples of how data-centric security can help you to ensure that data privacy and to basically achieve cross-regulatory compliance. So let's summarize that. Let's summarize this session. We know that we live in a data-driven economy, and collecting and analyzing data is absolutely important for all of our business. But what we want to do is we want to implement data-centric security, and with that data-centric security model, you want to protect sensitive elements, data elements, wherever possible. And this allows you to run, if you do it the right way, it allows you to run a workload on protected data elements. And this reduces the risk of actually sensitive data being exposed. And yeah, of course, it also brings you data privacy. It allows you to protect the data while, as we said at the beginning, still enabling the monetization of data and enabling data privacy. So thanks for listening. I think this is a fairly complex topic, and I would love to talk more about how we help as a company help you to solve specific use cases, how our solution can be deployed everywhere you need it, that it brings scalability, elasticity, how we help with cloud native projects, performance, availability, all those topics. But I stop right here because then we have a marketing pitch again, and we don't want to do that. But the best thing you can do actually is to reach out to us. Let's discuss your specific use case, how we can help you, and have a short meeting. I think that's always the best way to go forward. And that also saves you some time researching and allows us to explain our concept, our technology behind the solution, and make sure that that actually fits to what you are looking for. So thank you very much for joining. And let's start a little Q&A session. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat, or some of you might have my email address. Feel free to send me an email. So all right, we have one question. Maybe Heidi, it's might be some question for you also. We see a lot of fines with GDPR. Do you see similar fines coming up for CCPA and other regulations? Um,
Mm. Yeah, that's a good one. For other regulations, I'm not too sure. For CCPA, I think it's still a little bit early. Um, I probably would not expect to see much or the beginnings of things until the second half of this year if things do pop up. But I think the potential for some large fines coming out of CCPA is there. We'll have to see how the enforcement actions go and what I think the resources for those types of investigations and how fast uh, those move to get to a point where a fine could be issued.
awesome, thank you. Let's see, we have another question here. That's a good one. Is there a consent across regulations about what is considered adequately protected data?
Hmm. I feel like regulators often try to focus on encryption as a key control, but in terms of going across regulations for what's considered adequate, that's a bit more complex, I think, because there's going to be more than just encryption. And I know that with some regulations, people try to uh, reduce the scope, I guess, of what could be uh, falling under the compliance burden as well. So it's going to. I know this is an answer that folks don't like to hear, but it's going to depend.
Mhm. I think it's the best answer you can probably get out there. It's looking at those regulations or actually um, at the documents out there. It's, as you said, it's fairly high level sometimes, and it's up to the auditors to make sense of it sometimes. Okay. Um, Third question here. 1 second, I have to check. Is regulatory enforcement and high fines really realistic in the current COVID or post-COVID context? That's a good question.
Mm, yeah, very much so. Because I think for some regulators, they may um, I don't know about in Europe, and in the US, at least for HIPAA, there was a bit of almost like relaxing of the rules, I guess, for this type of emergency. I think the big question I have on my mind is when do they revert back and how do they do that as well? Because you could certainly have firms who, because of COVID and the pressures around it, try to make the case that it would have been overly burdensome to implement different security measures while they were trying to maybe provide telehealth, for example. Um, at some point, it's going to revert. I think a lot of it will depend on the perspective of the regulators of what was reasonable measures to be taking, what kind of documentation perhaps was behind the decisions that the company made at that time, and why the reasoning behind the actions that they did take or did not take would all be taken into account. I think as an organization, the important thing to be focused on is thinking through uh, the potential risks of the choices that they're making and trying to make the best and the most informed choices they can at this point in time so that on the other end, let's say if there is an investigation or something where you do have to be going back and forth with regulators, it can be a more productive conversation.
Thank you. Awesome. Then we have another question from the audience. What are the key risks with FPE, and what advice do you have for organizations on how best to approach that?
Mm. Key risks for FPE as in like format preserving encryption?
I would think so.
Huh. Yeah, key risks. I mean, the one that comes to mind is I think this was might have been a couple years ago already, but there were some of the FPE standards that were found to be not so secure. So that was a consideration if people were using solutions that happened to be running on that standard at the time to figure out if they needed to take different approaches. I think it's also just some of the risk would be to understand the differences between what you're getting through FPE versus other techniques because they're not the same. There's different use cases for it. There's differences in terms of, like, for example, like for some compliance requirements, things like encryption or tokenization might help to take things out of scope. Uh, FPE, maybe not necessarily so. And then it's also about the risks of, let's say, the resources and that you have in place to be managing these types of solutions too. Because with FPE, there's going to be a key management aspect to it.
Absolutely. Maybe I can add a few sentences here. I think there's a huge difference between several algorithms, and as a company, we offer various different protection methods. So there's a use case for every specific method. So data masking has its use cases, encryption has its use cases. It's always a mix of those methods. And as you just said, with FPE, a few years ago, there were some problems with some standards which are solved now. And of course, there's a difference between tokenization and format preserving encryption. And if you want to learn more about that, we actually have a ebook available on our webpage that explains all those different protection methods. That is free to download. You don't even have to enter a form there. Okay, another question that I have here, and maybe that's the last one then. 1 second. Heidi mentioned maintain consistent security wherever your data exists. That, I'm just scrolling, seems such a big ask. Can Heidi advise on how to best ensure consistent security over so many different environments, not just on-premise and in cloud, but where on-premise many users, poor stuff, respect for data security, etc. That's a long one.
Oh, yes, yes, it is. It is a big ask, and yes, it is something to strive for. Um, in terms of how you might break that down, in terms of approaches, it's as you look into different environments, there may be some options for native controls. In some cases, that could be sufficient, um, but I think this is where I would point back to the control framework that I had talked about, where under the defense piece of it, you've got these 4 pillars. So trying to do some consistency in terms of governing the access to the environment, to the data, have some means to at least audit what's going on, getting some visibility into that environment. You don't know what you don't know in those cases. So being able to see activity, data use, usage patterns, some type of ability to identify anomalies. You could think of this as key capabilities that you would enable for these different environments where possible.
Awesome. I think we are at the top of the hour. Thank you, Heidi. That was absolutely great to have you here and get your insights on the topic. Also, thank you for answering the audience questions. And I think if you want to learn more, reach out to us, visit our webpage, or also you can ask Forrester all the time, who are a great source of knowledge. And thank you for joining, and wish you all a great rest of the week, and stay healthy. Goodbye.